This is the Water Quality Association podcast.
Our partners, our sister associations in the different regions have done their state and regional capital visits, and we're happy to support them on those. Washington and Virginia were ones that we led for specific bills as well. And we've had quite a lot of visits this past year, and we're looking forward to having even more this coming year.
That's WQA's Government Affairs Manager Paige O'Malley talking about state advocacy on behalf of the water treatment industry. Part 2 of WQA's Government Affairs Report. And welcome to the podcast from the Water Quality Association, the leading voice of the residential, commercial, and industrial water treatment industry. I'm Wes Bleed. Find us at WQA.org. In this episode, we look at Part 2 of WQA's Government Affairs Annual Report as we turn to state and regional issues. My guest is Paige O'Malley, WQA's Government Affairs Manager. We talk about state legislative trends shaping the water treatment industry, from private wells and school drinking water to PFAS mitigation, water softeners, and emerging regulatory issues. While federal policy often sets direction, many of the most immediate impacts on members' businesses happen at the state level, and that's where WQA has been deeply engaged. Plus, we'll have our WQA tip. It's all coming up on the Water Quality Association podcast. And we're joined by WQA's Government Affairs Manager, Paige O'Malley, now to talk primarily about state issues. And Paige, welcome to the program. Glad to have you back on the podcast.
Hi, glad to be here.
You know, if I could just begin with a kind of a general question, why is it important for WQA to be active at both the state as well as the federal level at the same time?
Yeah, so I may be biased. I think state is extraordinarily important. But at the state level, we have the opportunity to really impact policy at a more granular level. Things tend to move a bit faster at the state level than at the federal level. And that tends to be where we see the most impact to our members' everyday lives and their business functions as well. So in a way, it's more important in a more granular kind of aspect.
All right. Well, we're going to dive into your deck here. So as we look at 2025 and we look back at the year just completed and state legislative trends, what can you tell us about what this slide represents?
Yeah, so this slide is a bit of a breakdown of some of the finer details that we've been working on through the different states. And as you see with these different percentages across the bottom, we tracked a little over 300 bills this year by the end of things. And what we see this year is a pretty even spread across issues. In the past, we've seen an influx of bills dealing with lead or an influx dealing with PFAS, and that tends to correlate with what the federal government is doing a bit as well. We've still seen, obviously, a lot of PFAS legislation this year, and we'll continue to see that as the federal EPA reevaluates their regulations and their recommendations. Lead, of course, is still pretty high, but the one that we do see that has made a bit of a spike this year has been in private well legislation. You know, as we spoke to earlier, federally, we've been working pretty closely on the Healthy H2O Act, which does, of course, impact private wells, small systems, and some other folks. But we've seen the states really take an interest in this as well, and in a way take a more proactive role in being involved. And private wells have been a point where we have made some very interesting allies. This year, we had the chance to work with the Realtors Association, both nationally and at the local level. Our members in Nevada had the chance to work with them specifically on some well testing. You may know there's a pretty high level of arsenic in some of the private wells out there. So testing for those during the sale of a home was an issue that we had members working on. And then federally, they've just taken more of an interest in taking a look at those pieces as well to make sure that they understand when they're selling homes that have private wells. So those are kind of some of the highlights. School water quality has continued to be a very important issue as well. Really, since Michigan Filter First, it's continued to be more and more important in more and more states. So we see that one being a little higher as well. And the interesting piece on that too is that they're looking at more than just lead now. They're looking at PFAS, other contaminants, although lead still seems to be the primary driver in those school-focused bills. But we've seen more and more of those, and that is very reflected in our letters and coalition work.
So if I could just expand on all of this, you see these different trends and these issues coming to light in the various state capitals. How are you measuring success? Is it in terms of bills passed or bills maybe negated even? What are you looking at?
So I think there's a bit of a combination and a bit of kind of neither as well. Another trend, and we saw this earlier in the presentation as well, is that we are tracking more and more bills every year. So we're seeing more and more education, more and more interest, and more activism just in the water space in general, which in itself is its own kind of victory. But with pass fail, with our industry in particular, it's not as indicative of our success, because you do want some bills to fail and some bills to pass, whether they're damaging or encouraging to the industry. But also, we have a few bills that did not pass this past year that we sent letters on, that we supported, that we worked on with our coalition and with our allies in the industry, that did not pass this year, but we anticipate they will come back next year and be something we continue to work on. So that progress, although it's not a clear-cut victory in a pass-fail sense, is very important for getting our message out there and getting folks more educated on water quality issues.
Let's move on to the next slide. You mentioned letters.
This slide is a good list of all of our letter campaigns that we've worked on, either individually, just as WQA, with some of our state and regionals, and with some of the coalitions we work on. And some of our coalitions are with other allies like IAPMO, NSF, ASA, PHCC folks. There's a lot of folks that work on these different issues with us, and that's just a few of them. So we sign on to these joint letters to really give a larger voice from the industry, to get more attention from legislators, and to really make our voices heard. So these are some of those letters, and you'll see quite a lot of them are school water related. Again, that has been a very big topic of conversation, and the industry as a whole is really rallying behind that.
And who do the letters go to?
So they typically go to the legislator. So the legislator that introduces the bill, it's a tool that they can use in committee to say, look, here's a bunch of support that we have from the industry on this. It can go to educate. Occasionally, we may have a tweak or an edit to a bill. Usually they're very friendly amendments. A lot of times just advocating that they use certified products. If the state's going to pay for it, make sure you have a certified product so that it's doing what it's intended to do. Things of that nature. But they tend to go to the legislators that introduce the bills and the committees that are voting on the bills.
I want to pause for a second here and add a little bit of an editorial comment. This slide represents a lot. This is huge impact here for WQA members to realize that this is going on in the background and that this is happening on the behalf of all of the WQA members, manufacturers and dealers and others involved in the industry. This is happening on the behalf of all of these different members and others who are not members of WQA. So I just like to pause for a second and think about the impact all of these different letters and other things we'll get into are having on the industry itself. All right, let's move on. So legislative tracking, you mentioned 300 bills plus. Was that it you're tracking?
Yes. And that's just state bills. Federal bills, there's a handful that we've been tracking across a few different issue areas. An interesting one that kind of crosses paths with the state has been with a lot of military and NASA sites. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too, where there's been a lot of involvement on PFAS mitigation surrounding some of those sites, just because of the nature of the firefighting foam that they use around those bases, NASA sites. A big federal bill we saw is here in my home state of Virginia surrounding Wallops Island and the launch spaces. But we've seen a variety of federal monies coming down for different spill sites. We've seen a big one in Spokane between Fairchild Air Force Base and the Spokane Airport. So those are some of the issues, and then quite a variety of state bills like we saw in the graphs before. And then,
you want to talk a little bit about the visits at the state capitol level?
Yeah, of course, our partners, our sister associations in the different regions have done their state and regional capital visits, and we're happy to support them on those. Washington and Virginia were ones that we led for specific bills as well. And we've had quite a lot of visits this past year, and we're looking forward to having even more this coming year, just to really get members in front of state legislators advocating for their industry and educating on what we do.
Fantastic. Again, a lot going on in the background. Okay. And then we have a consultant in California.
Yeah, so this year we had consultants in both Washington and California. Randy, of course, is our resident expert in California. He's been with us for quite a few years. So he's done a bit of a breakdown here to just a blurb about what's going on out there. A thing to know about California is that this past year, they kind of start doing more of the lead work, putting in placeholder bills, things like that. And then going into this coming year, the 2026 session, we'll see them really flesh out those bills, a lot more details, and we'll really see that a lot more movement, a little less calm like it was. This past year was a little calmer. It's going to be a little more heavy out there, just intense with the amount of legislation and the impacts that they'll have. And California has very much put out there that while the federal EPA is stalling on their PFAS regulations, that they will be moving forward ahead of that. So something for us to definitely take a look at this year and stay on top of.
Yeah, it's a very important role that Randy plays out in California. And some of you know Randy, he often attends convention, and I know that over the years you've gotten to know him. So great to have Randy on board. You want to talk about some of the individual states?
Yeah, so one that is a more recent issue is Ohio. So this came up towards the end of 2025, where we had some very active legislators that came in and put in a bill that would help to allow more point of use and point of entry technologies to be used in small drinking systems, small public water systems, to allow them to comply with State Drinking Water Act, MCLs. So this is particularly important in Ohio, where they have the ability to use some point of use and point of entry, but only for non-transient water systems. Mostly schools was where it's primarily targeted to, and only in cases of arsenic. So it really kneecaps both schools and small public water systems, so small villages like under 500 connections. And we have a specific village that we've been working with some members that is, I believe, under 300 people. So very difficult to upgrade an entire water system for a town that small and make it economically feasible. So being able to use point of use and point of entry technologies like our members manufacture and install would be extremely useful for these folks and their quality of water.
And that could take some time to work its way through the process, right?
Yes. So it was introduced in late November, early December, and it'll be carrying through into the 2026 session. But it's looking very good, very strong patrons. We've been working closely with Ohio EPA and really looking forward to this being on our strong success list for our annual report next year.
Excellent. And Washington, the state of Washington.
Yes. So we did our first Hill Day out in Washington this year. We had consultants out there that we worked with. An interesting issue out in Washington came out of a 2021 law change that required everyone doing water treatment work out there to be plumbers. So we had the opportunity to go out there, really work with labor and industries, with other stakeholders like the Plumbers Union, and try to work through some of the issues that kind of came of that broad sweeping change in 2021. That work is still ongoing. We've retained legal counsel out there to take a look at everything and just evaluate what the options are moving forward and to better alleviate some of those concerns for members.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned Virginia before, your home state.
Yeah, my home state of Virginia. So 2 years ago, we had a member put in a bill that was very, very similar to our Healthy H2O Act. And this past year, we had the chance to really run through the traps with that bill to work with the different regulatory offices, because this bill does touch 3 different regulatory offices in Virginia, to better create what's kind of like a miniature Healthy H2O Act. So this bill pays for approximately 50% of water treatment needed to mitigate a private well issue for low-income folks in Virginia. And it covers everything from testing, installation, and then also maintenance, which is a great one we see left out pretty often. So unfortunately, the bill did not pass this year, primarily because it's a non-budget year in Virginia. So going into 2026, we are going into a budget year with a very new legislature. So we should see some some different movement on that this year, but something that we're continuing to work on that will have a lot of benefit for low-income folks on private wells in Virginia.
Well, when it comes to the Healthy H2O Act at the state level, then is this maybe the beginning of further efforts on the state level to pass similar legislation?
I think it's a trend kind of like we've seen on a few other federal issues. We just mentioned that California is taking the lead on PFAS. This is an area where a lot of times our state legislatures feel that they have members that are particularly impacted. That's the example in Ohio, is that we had a legislator who felt his region was particularly impacted by the lack of being able to use point of use and point of entry. So we're seeing in Virginia, there's a lot of folks on private wells. The federal government moves slow, and there is an appetite to move a little faster and do what we can in our own backyards versus waiting for the federal government. So they will work very hand in hand. And this doesn't negate any of the work we're doing with the Healthy H2O Act. It just further supports it. So it's just more trying to take the lead, but also supporting our efforts federally.
All right, very good. And you mentioned school drinking water before. So there was some success in New Jersey, I see.
Yeah. So New Jersey did take the lead on getting one of these bills passed. We wrote a letter on this. So this is really a success from our coalition and our letter writing campaigns that we mentioned earlier. This one will really focus on schools, water testing, and it is a little more focused on lead, but the language is very focused on water bottle filling stations and filtered faucets, and just generally a great example of where we can really help and connect in the school environment.
School drinking water fountains have come a long way since when I was in school. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
All right. Water softeners. Wow.
Yeah.
That's coming back. Huh? That's an issue again?
Well, it was an issue in Maine. We had to pivot pretty quickly. And I know we've talked about it probably a few times throughout the year, but there was a bill. It was meant to be an energy efficiency bill, which you may ask, how do softeners get looped into that? They shouldn't have been, which is something that we really rallied the troops in Maine and even our manufacturers for softeners nationally on a big letter to really address why they should not have been included. We worked pretty closely with the Maine Department of Environmental Protection up there, so Maine EPA, to get this taken out, and it was successfully struck from the bill. They're still doing some efficiency on some other things. It was looped in with things like fryers, all sorts of things. So not something it should have been in. It was an opportunity for us to educate and to grow some allies within the regulatory field in Maine. So it was a great success. And then, of course, in Tennessee, we had a bill where it stemmed from an apartment complex wanted to add soft water as a benefit for their tenants. And unfortunately, it put them in making them a small public water system with quite a lot of burdens, costs, testing, things like that. So the Tennessee legislature wanted to find a way to alleviate that burden. This is probably an issue we will work with them on some more. It's an issue that we've seen come up in other states with consecutive systems and things of that nature. So really just helping them alleviate the burden for their small systems.
That's an actually very interesting topic. I just find that fascinating. All right. More lead in schools in Pennsylvania.
Yes. So Pennsylvania similarly launched a program putting more than $3,000 into hydration stations in different schools and really continuing to push schools and also child care facilities, so daycares, things like that. We're really seeing the kind of filter first mentality that Michigan started a few years ago really trickle into other states. And it's really picking up steam, as we've said, like more than just lead even. They want general water quality everywhere.
Some success with PFAS in Spokane and New Jersey. Did we already cover that?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit. Spokane has quite a bit of trouble with PFAS in their groundwater, right between Fairchild Air Force Base, Spokane Airport, and there's been several $1 million, $7.5 million to be exact, deployed for point of use and point of entry technologies to be used to help folks affected by this groundwater contamination. So that's a great area where we've seen a bit of crossover between federal and state funding and regulation. In New Jersey, somewhat similar. They had a very large spill settlement from a few manufacturers PFAS as well as some other contaminants, but PFAS being the biggest one, and working with local dealers and manufacturers to use point of use and point of entry equipment to alleviate the burden on those homeowners.
All right, Paige. Well, it looks like we've got to the last slide here. So I appreciate this report via the WQA podcast. Excellent. And you guys, if anybody wonders who is among the busier folks at WQA, the government affairs team has got to be included in that discussion, I would imagine. But looking ahead to 2026, what state level issues should WQA members be paying attention to, and what are you going to be paying attention to as we move forward into the new year?
Yeah, so I think we'll be paying pretty close attention to some of the issues, obviously, this past year that were very impactful. We want to grow those relationships as we see more and more private well bills coming up. And we see that being a higher priority for our legislators. And that's a great niche for us, obviously, to be able to support our federal work and to be able to support all of our members at the state and local level. We'll also be continuing to look at school-related issues pretty thoroughly as well. We've seen that growing, and we get more and more questions from legislators with a greater appetite to expand on that. For a while, it was just daycares and elementary schools, and it's really expanded to all schools. We're seeing it across the 50 states, more and more questions for making sure our children have quality water. And then, of course, we will continue to look for new emerging contaminants or MCLs that are coming out in the states. And we always want to make sure we're supporting what the standard in the industry can do, making sure states don't get quite so froggy that they get ahead of what we can provide, and just continuing to drive the industry forward as an expert voice and leaders on water quality issues.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here for the podcast to give our members this update on WQA's government affairs for 2025 and looking ahead to 26. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, Paige.
Thank you.
And now our WQA tip. The WQA Convention and Expo is coming up April 28th through the 30th in Miami Beach. So it's time to get registered and visit the WQA Convention website, wqa.org/convention, to download our social media toolkit. You can find it under the Attend tab. Graphics and messaging are all ready for you to cut and paste onto your social media accounts. Post by April 3rd to LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram with the WQA 2026 hashtag, and you could receive a $50 gift card. Learn more and register at wqa.org/convention. Thanks for joining us for the Water Quality Association podcast. Learn more about water and water filtration at our consumer website, betterwatertoday.org. And learn more about professional certification, the Gold Seal Product Certification Program, and how you can become a member at WQA.org.